Welcome to Upfront, I'm Katie Hannon. It's Nullag na Mon Women's Christmas, and tonight Upfront is a little different. We want to have a very important conversation and ask what more can be done to protect women from violence. Later in the programme we'll talk to David French. His sister Valerie died at the hands of her husband. He's calling for Valeries Law to strip parents who killed their partners of their rights over their children. I don't want to cut across. We will come back to that because it's a very important issue, but I want to bring in David French now. Thank you for that, Sarah. David, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight as well. You were here because of what happened to your sister Valerie. She was murdered, or she was killed by her husband, James Kilroy. Just again, tell me again, what kind of a person was Valerie?
So basically Valerie was an occupational therapist, so she was kind of caring for people as part of her job. But that's very much who she was as a person herself. She was very much able to reach out, understand people's situation, and be positive actions to improve that situation, whether it was mental health, whether it was a physical disability, whatever it was. So that was her professional life, it was her personal life. She quit her job in Liverpool after her father died to be with mum, to care for her. She was great at caring for her sons, very much a people person in a way. She was great academically and all, but very engaged with people and would see the best in them and kind of improve their situation where she could.
And again, there was no history of domestic violence that you were aware of?
There's no history of domestic violence that I was aware of, and that's one of the things that comes out in court. You know, the defence or prosecution will say, ask the guards, was there any report? But what Jim mentioned earlier, the research from 2023 says in about 40% of cases, there hasn't been a guard call out for domestic violence. And I think that's a trap for a lot of women. They think, well, if he's not battering me, he won't kill me. He'd hit me first, I get a warning. And it's like, it's not necessarily that. In a lot of cases, as much as 40%, it can go from 0 to 100. It can go from zero violence to homicide.
As Claire said. So, did you have any idea that that Valerie was in any danger at all then?
Not danger. You know, marriages go through ups and downs, especially when there's kids appear on the scene, all of that. We knew they had difficulties, you know, it wasn't an easy life, but there was no feeling of imminent danger, no. So
when you got the word that something terrible had happened?
Obviously it's a shock. The Garda Síochána had got mum's address down in West Cork. The Garda Síochána have and continue to be excellent in this, absolutely all the way through. Thankfully, one of my sisters was with mum that evening, and then I was able to get on the phone. Then I was able to show up in Castlebar where it happened, and it went from there.
Can I say, I'll just ask you, like, what impact has it had on on yourself and on your family and your mum?
Well, it killed mum. I mean, mum died suddenly a few months later, and the 5 months in between were hell for her, absolutely hell. It impacts everything. Every relationship that Valerie's siblings or relations have is put under massive stress. When something like this happens, you know, you doubt your judgment of people, you're dealing with massive anger. It affects people in different ways. You're trying to shield kids from it because suddenly, like, their uncle is this person and their aunt isn't there anymore. And depending what age kids are, whether they're going into relationships or whatever, it can be very, very difficult for them to process for years and years and years.
Can I ask you then, the reason you wanted to come in here tonight, because you're on a mission. Valerie's husband pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but he was convicted of murder last July. But even though he was found guilty, he remains a guardian to their two children, their two boys. Yeah. What does that actually mean in practice?
So basically he's included in the same way as any guardian who is in prison would be, or as any guardian would be. Obviously he's in prison, so he can't have custody of my nephews. But he is informed of where their situation, where they're living, how they're getting on, their health. He's involved in any major decisions. He has to be consulted if they go abroad. He's just like a regular guardian. The murder conviction has no effect on his guardianship status. Being in prison is the only thing that has an effect, but he's a guardian same way that I'm a guardian to my kids.
So you want that changed now?
That should absolutely be changed. I mean, the bottom line is killing a mother is child abuse. Killing a father is child abuse as well, but killing a mother is child abuse. And if you're killing the mother of your kids, you have just abused those children. And yet you have this position where you are their guardian. That's insane.
They've changed this in the UK now. They brought in Jade's Law this summer, last May. And you want Valeries Law to be introduced here?
Yeah, I'd like to see Valeries Law introduced. I don't like this like naming things as Valeries Law. There's actually a Valeries Law in the UK named after a very similar situation. And that lady was in a minority, and there's a whole Valeries Law thing over there. So if you Google it, you can cross over to that. The idea is simply guardianship should be removed when someone kills their spouse or their partner and they share children with them. I've put a bunch of stuff on a website, valerie.rap, on that. Other countries have similar things, not as advanced as the UK on this. And it's a thing that doesn't cost anything. I mean, a lot of the things in the government report, which is massive.
That's is that the study on familicide and violent family
death review?
It's easier when it's in
front of you. A study on familicide and domestic and family violence death reviews. That's a 4-year study, 200 recommendations. Jim and Kathleen will be particularly, and Sarah will be familiar with all of this. But this particular thing about removing guardianship, that comes from Carol Coulter's work in the whole CCLRP, Childcare Law Reform Project. There's no cost involved. A lot of the issues and measures that can be taken, there's a cost. Setting up the domestic violence register, setting up refuges, they cost money, they take time. This is just a paperwork change. It doesn't require millions. It's just put a simple piece of legislation through the door, and there's no one on the other side. You have killers on one side and you have abused children on the other. This isn't a case where you've got to talk to the other side.
This should be a no-brainer, you're saying?
It should be a no-brainer. Okay. I'm not quite sure why. It's only a matter of prioritization and literally just putting in the program for government. I know there's no party that's come back to me and said, I think that's a bad idea, or we should do something else. It's a straightforward, just get it done. Okay,
and I'll bring that back to the panel very briefly. Claire, you also had to fight this issue in relation to Nadine's daughter, so you'd support this?
I completely endorse everything that David is doing, and David and I have had a number of conversations around this. In our case, the perpetrator never had guardianship. However, he was a biological father, and because he was a biological father, I had to fight him in court for custody and guardianship.
Okay, I'm going to bring that straight to you, Jim O'Callaghan. A no-brainer,
yeah, I agree.
Straightforward and simple.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. All that is required is that we need to introduce an amendment to the Child and Family Relationships Act. As David has said, it's set out in the recommendation that was contained within the study, which was published, I think, in July 2023. It should be done. It was done in the UK previously, and I certainly would support it. And whether or not it's in the programme for government, I think...
First, I mean, as there is a huge number of recommendations from that report.
Yeah.
200 and...
It's a very detailed report.
Yes. Like, would you be inclined to support the idea that this...
David is correct. It is a straightforward change, and most people are astonished when they hear that somebody who could be convicted, a parent who's convicted of the murder of another parent,
when I heard this
that they retain guardianship of any surviving child or children. That's an astonishment to most people. Yeah. But like, there's other anomalies in the law as well. Like back in 2017... So
you're committing tonight, sorry Jim, but we're tight in time.
I'm committing myself. I'm saying that it is something that I fully support, and I would have thought virtually every member of the Oireachtas would support it as well. But can I say this as well? There's other laws that need to be changed. Like we saw a number of years ago, whereby if a man or a partner murders another partner, kills another partner, and they have a joint tenancy, they jointly own a house, he will then get full ownership of the house if there's a joint tenancy there. That's an area of the law that needs to be changed. Fianna Fáil and myself introduced legislation to that effect in 2017. That too needs to be enacted.
Okay. So if you are Justice Minister, if you get that opportunity, you're saying you'll take this on?
Irrespective, Katie, of who is Justice Minister, I think this has to be a priority. Okay. And we have to, can I just say, Helen McAtee has done excellent work in the area of gender-based violence, and her good work needs to be continued.
Okay, Kathleen Funchion.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with exactly what David said. It's insane to think that situation would even exist, and talk about re-traumatising families and the children, and also then children are victims in this situation. So I would 100% support that. But I also want to reference there's other situations whereby if someone is brave and courageous enough and gets out of a really difficult, really bad, really horrific relationship, often in cases, the ex-partner is granted some level of visitation, and that's very, very difficult. And I've come across so many women that are actually afraid to look for maintenance or to go down the road of looking for maintenance because they're so afraid that the ex-partner is then going to get some sort of custody or right. So there is a huge amount that needs to change in relation to the kind of the family court law, system and family law. And I think that all has to play a part in this. We can't look at one or two things in isolation. Everything, in order, like if we're really serious about tackling this issue, which we really should be, it should be what we're going to say at the start of 2025, this issue is going to be tackled. And I think we just need to make sure that we've all of those agencies at the table, because the family law courts as well, very intimidating, very daunting for women to go into. So, we need to ensure that people that are dealing with that in terms of the judiciary actually are trained, for that specific purpose and that specific reason too.
Okay. Sarah Benson, I mean, there are so many facets to this, and all of them are so important when you look at them. I mean, obviously, this issue that David raises, there seems to be cross-party political support for it. It's still not in place, unfortunately. The whole issue of safe accommodation as well. We know there's been good progress made in terms of increasing the number of refuges. There's still 6 counties with no refuge at all. Or 7 counties with no refuge at all. And that is just, as you mentioned earlier, Kathleen Funchion, just a small part of it, because obviously a refuge is just an emergency answer to a very, which are long-term problems for people. What would you put as the priorities that need to be addressed and could be quickly addressed? As the programme for government is being written this week as we face into 2025, what should be in it?
Well, firstly, we Women's Aid have been in close contact with Dave and fully support and endorse that call for legislation, and we've both been part of the advisory working with the Department of Justice on how to actually process the recommendations of that report, which we hope to see in the programme for government. We're midway in the National Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Strategy, midway. It requires a whole of government response. That is only taking shape now with the establishment of the agency CUAN. It has to have a responsibility at the Cabinet table. The Cabinet Committee on Social Affairs is supposed to attend to it to make sure that it is housing, it is health. This is a criminal justice issue, it is a civil law issue, it is a public health issue, it is a housing issue. So it requires that whole of government response. What I will say, circling back, I think it's really important. David asked the question, why is this not happening? It's a no-brainer. One of the things in this third strategy, which is in for the first time, incredibly, is reference to children, and the voice of the child often gets lost. And what Kathleen has said is really important. Of course, if rights and responsibilities are not properly balanced out at all stages, when there is abuse in a relationship, even when a life is taken, that balance of rights and responsibilities, you should not have rights where you have revoked all responsibility and duty of care to your children. And the same goes, where there is coercive control, post-separation control, and control through the courts. So the family justice strategy is a crucial adjunct to the domestic, sexual and gender-based violence strategy that has to centralise the experience of children.
Okay, and we will come back to this again after the break. But we've been talking about the gravest aspect of violence against women. After the break, we'll hear from Bláthnaid Raleigh, who survived a brutal rape, and she'll tell us how our justice system needs to change and why we need to include men of all ages in this conversation.